Forgotten millionaires of history. Rise and fall of the wealthy elite. Throughout history, many rich and powerful people have faded from memory, leaving only traces of their once great fortunes. The forgotten millionaires of the past built huge wealth and influence, but their stories often get lost. In this video, we'll explore how these wealthy people rose to power, built their empires, and then lost it all. Let's uncover the stories of these forgotten richest and what we can learn from their rise and fall. J. Paul Getty. The Getty family was once famous for their massive oil wealth and J. Paul Getty's passion for art, but nowadays they're more known for making headlines every decade or so, and usually for tragic reasons. J. Paul Getty's life was like a story of two extremes. On one hand, he built an enormous international oil empire, becoming one of the world's richest men. On the other hand, his family fell apart over the years, with many suffering due to the wealth he amassed. In 1957, J. Paul Getty was one of the richest people on the planet thanks to his oil operations in the Neutral Zone, an area between Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. But his final years were tragic. He saw his eldest son commit suicide, his daughter-in-law die from a heroin overdose, and his grandson kidnapped, even losing an ear in the process. Getty was born in 1892 in Minneapolis. His father, George Franklin Getty, was successful as a lawyer and later as an oil prospector in Oklahoma. Growing up in Los Angeles, J. Paul joined his father's oil company at 21 and quickly made a fortune. By his mid-20s, he was a millionaire, temporarily retiring to enjoy life in Los Angeles. But eventually, he returned to the oil business alongside his father. By the time his father died in 1930, Getty had already been married and divorced multiple times and had children from these relationships. From the Great Depression onward, J. Paul Getty bought up many companies, creating the giant Getty Oil Company in 1956. This business eventually took on the big oil giants of the time, like Standard Oil and BP. In 1948, he secured a huge oil deal in Saudi Arabia's Neutral Zone, which was a major risk since oil prices were low and he had to pay the Saudi king a large upfront amount. By 1953, he struck oil there and doubled his fortune. With his new wealth, Getty built an empire with oil exploration, production, refining, and even his own fleet of tankers. In 1957, Fortune magazine named him the richest man in the U.S. He bought Sutton Place, a mansion in England in 1959, where he lived the rest of his life. He even installed a payphone for guests to avoid feeling imposed upon by their calls. Getty was excellent at spotting good business opportunities, but his personal life was troubled. He once bragged about having hundreds of lovers and gave money to many of them, but he had little regard for his own children who felt ignored and belittled. His eldest son, George, worked in the family business, but suffered from his father's constant criticism. George eventually died by suicide after years of feeling unappreciated. J. Paul Getty's grandson, J. Paul III, was a rebellious child and became part of the underground Rome. In 1973, he was kidnapped by a gang of Italian criminals. First, the family believed it was just a hoax, only to find the captors more serious when they mutilated the boy's ear to make certain the elder Getty knew they were serious, and followed up by demanding $1 million for his safe return. J. Paul III was then set free, but he was left traumatized. He developed a stroke that made him partially disabled. When J. Paul Getty died in 1976, most of his estate went to the J. Paul Getty Museum. The Getty family wealth was primarily held in the Sarah C. Getty Trust, established by J. Paul's mother. By 1985, the family trust held a 40% interest in Getty Oil. Gordon Getty, one of J. Paul's sons, later sold Getty Oil to Texaco in 1984 for more than $10 billion. This led to conflicts within the family, with relatives suing over what they saw as an unfair division of J. Paul Getty's fortune. Gordon Getty later faced a scandal when it was revealed he had a second hidden family in Los Angeles while being married to his wife Anne. In recent years, the family has remained more private, though one of J. Paul's grandsons, Mark Getty, successfully co-founded Getty Images, a stock photography company. Despite challenges from cheaper competitors, Getty Images became one of the biggest companies in the stock photography world. a major achievement for the family. J. Paul Getty, with his remarkable success and turbulent family life, became a symbol of extreme wealth. But his family's tragedies highlighted that money, in the end, can't buy happiness, a reality the Gettys learned in painful ways. John Jacob Astor. John Jacob Astor is often known as America's first multi-millionaire, building his fortune mainly through land and real estate. He and his son spent years buying various pieces of property around New York City and then moved to acquiring even larger plots up north. When Astor died in 1848, he had one main regret: not buying more real estate. He famously said, "If I could do it over again, I'd put every nickel I had into New York real estate." Astor's fortune, though, didn't come easily or ethically. According to biographer Anderson Cooper, he was known as a ruthless businessman, particularly in the fur trade. Astor saw the high profits from selling beaver pelts, with markups sometimes reaching 600 to 800%. He ventured into the wilderness, trading with indigenous people, but often took advantage of both his traders and indigenous communities. He would mark up supplies for his traders, forcing them to pass on the cost to the indigenous groups, often unfairly. By 1834, Astor's fur trading company was the largest business in the U.S., reflecting his aggressive and sometimes unethical business style. The Astor legacy continued with his son William, who owned many buildings across New York. The family became what's known as slumlords. They'd rent land to middlemen who would build on it, but when the leases expired, anything on the land reverted back to the Astor family. This left little motivation for tenants to keep up the properties, leading to neglected buildings. Even today, the Astor name is deeply ingrained in New York's infrastructure, like the Astor Place subway station, where the beaver symbols represent the origins of the Astor fortune. As for whether there were any good figures in the Astor family, Cooper suggests that every family has its mix of heroes and villains. One interesting exception was Brooke Astor, the third wife of Vincent Astor. Vincent was deeply troubled to learn that his family was labeled as slumlords. He sold some assets, started a foundation, and tried to improve the family's reputation. When Vincent died, he left his wealth to Brooke, who took her philanthropic role seriously. She actively visited housing projects and shelters to ensure her contributions were used properly, rehabilitating the family's name and giving back to New York City in a meaningful way. Cooper's book, co-written with historian Catherine Howe, provides a detailed look at the Astor dynasty. In it, Cooper also shares a personal memory from when he was 13 and had lunch with Brooke Astor alongside his mother, Gloria Vanderbilt. Although Gloria, a Vanderbilt herself, wasn't close with Brooke, seeing them together symbolized the last traces of an elite society, representing two historic families at a moment of passing legacy. Anderson Cooper explains that the Vanderbilts, despite their immense wealth, were seen as nouveau riche, or newly rich, in New York society. When Commodore Vanderbilt passed away, he left behind a fortune of $100 million. However, his manners didn't match the refined standards of the elite, so it was his grandchildren who made efforts to enter New York's upper social circles. One significant obstacle in their path was Caroline Astor, a powerful figure who controlled New York's social register known as the Astor 400. The exclusive list supposedly represented the 400 people who could fit in Caroline's ballroom, and she set strict rules for entry, such as having French chefs and French-style architecture standards that naturally favored her and her social circle. However, Cooper's great-great-aunt, Alva Vanderbilt, found a clever way to break into this social elite. She organized an extravagant party that quickly became the most talked-about event. Caroline Astor's daughter, Carrie, was eager to attend, which eventually pushed Caroline to recognize the Vanderbilts socially. This was a turning point for the family, who were finally welcomed into high society. Cooper shares that he always knew there wouldn't be any Vanderbilt fortune waiting for him. He felt that inheriting wealth often led to negative outcomes, so he was at peace with it. Brooke Astor, another well-known figure in the family, faced difficulties in her later years, particularly with her son from a previous marriage, Tony Marshall. When Brooke developed Alzheimer's, she chose not to give him control over her foundation, hinting that he wouldn't inherit it. Later, when Brooke's health declined, her relationship with Tony grew tense, as Tony was accused of taking advantage of her condition and even stealing money from her. He eventually faced trial and was convicted. When asked about today's wealthy figures such as Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, Cooper reflected on how these modern-day billionaires compare to historical elites. He noted that the full impact of these current fortunes is still unknown, but suggested that they could learn from the stories of past wealthy families. Vanderbilt family. For over a century, the Vanderbilt family symbolized the American dream. However, after a series of bitter divorces, poor financial choices, and high-profile scandals, their vast wealth and social prominence began to crumble. The turning point for the Vanderbilts came on March 26, 1883, when their grand residence, Petit Chateau on Fifth Avenue, hosted a party so extravagant that the New York World called it an event never equaled in the social annals of the metropolis. Alva Vanderbilt, the hostess, wore pearls once owned by Russian Empress Catherine the Great. While already immensely wealthy, this event wasn't just a celebration. It was Alva's calculated move to break into New York's elite social circle, ruled by families like the Astors. As Vanderbilt family historian Arthur T. Vanderbilt II noted, Alva wasn't looking for another house, but rather a weapon to elevate her family's status. Alva's ambitions continued when she arranged for her daughter, Consuelo, to marry the Duke of Marlborough, cousin of Winston Churchill. This marriage brought the Vanderbilts royal ties, moving them into circles that included King Edward VII and the Tsar of Russia. Cornelius Vanderbilt, Consuelo's great-grandfather, started from humble beginnings. Born in 1794, he left school at age 11 to work on his father's ferry in New York. Over the next 70 years, Cornelius, nicknamed the Commodore, built a transportation empire through sheer grit and shrewd business moves. A significant break came in 1817 when Thomas Gibbons hired him to captain a steamboat between New York and New Jersey, introducing Vanderbilt to the steamboat industry. By the 1860s, Vanderbilt had become a titan of the railroads and established Grand Central Depot, a New York landmark. By the time of his death in 1877, Vanderbilt left behind an astonishing fortune worth $100 million, more than the U.S. Treasury held at that time. He intended for his heirs to preserve his fortune, famously advising them to keep their money together. Unfortunately, his descendants didn't heed his advice. The Grand Petit Chateau was demolished in 1926, making way for a Zara store, and many other Vanderbilt mansions on Fifth Avenue suffered similar fates. Only a few properties remain, like the Marble Twins and the Biltmore Estate in North Carolina, now historical landmarks. Vanderbilt family members continued to display opulent tastes in their homes, with the Marble House in Newport, Rhode Island, completed in 1892 as a 35th birthday gift from Alva's husband, William. It features marble grander than the White House, inspired by French palaces like the Petit Trianon and the Palace of Versailles. Cornelius Vanderbilt II's summer estate, the Breakers, completed in 1895, has 70 rooms and occupies an entire acre. Today, these once private residences operate as public museums, preserving the memory of a family whose rise and fall captured the ambitions and excesses of the American Gilded Age. The Vanderbilts were not just spenders, they were earning massive fortunes as well. William Henry Vanderbilt, the Commodore's son, was making about $19.73 a minute back in his day. When he passed away in 1885, he left a staggering $200 million, worth about $50 billion today. Despite their lavish spending, his son, Cornelius Vanderbilt II, kept the family empire running strong, managing the business with his brother William. But soon after, things took a downturn. Cornelius II's descendants became known more for spending than earning, and they often met tragic ends. Cornelius's son, Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt, a well-known carriage racer, almost boarded the Titanic but narrowly missed it. 3 years later, in 1915, he died heroically on the Lusitania, giving his life jacket to a woman as the ship sank, even though he couldn't swim. Alfred was succeeded by his brother, Reginald Vanderbilt, who passed away in his 40s from liver failure due to heavy drinking. Yet, the Vanderbilt legacy didn't end there. Harold Sterling Vanderbilt, the Commodore's great-grandson, was the last Vanderbilt on the board of the New York Central Railway.